If everybody could please take their seats, please. We will call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Education of Community Unit School District 201, today, Tuesday, August 17th, 2010. Roll call, please.
Ms. Casey? Mr. Charleston?
Here.
Mrs. Charlton?
Here. No.
Mrs. Hancock?
Here.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
If we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on the agenda is the administration of the oath of office of Mrs. Hancock. If you would. Oath of office.
I, Shannon Hancock,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully discharge
that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office
the duties of the office
of member of the Board of Education
of member of the Board of Education
of Community Unit School District 201
of Community Unit School District 201
in accordance with the Constitution of the United States,
in accordance with the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the laws of the State of Illinois
and the laws of the State of Illinois,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
I further swear
I further swear
that I shall respect
that I shall respect
taxpayer interests
taxpayer interests
by serving as a faithful protector
by serving as a faithful protector
of the school district's assets.
of the school district's assets.
I shall encourage and respect
I shall encourage and respect
the free expression of opinion
the free expression of opinion
by my fellow board members
by my fellow board members
and others
and others
who seek a hearing before the board,
who seek a hearing before the board,
while respecting
while respecting
the privacy of students and employees.
the privacy of students and employees.
I shall recognize
I shall recognize
that a board member has no legal authority
that a board member has no legal authority
as an individual,
as an individual,
and that decisions can be made
and that decisions can be made
only by a majority vote
only by a majority vote
at a public board meeting.
at a public board meeting.
And
And
I shall abide by majority decisions of the board
I shall abide by majority decisions of the board
while retaining the right
while retaining the right
to seek changes
to seek changes
in such decisions
in such decisions
through ethical
through ethical
and constructive channels.
and constructive channels.
Welcome to the Board of Education.
Thank you very much.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the appointment of a Secretary Pro Tem. The Chair will entertain a motion to appoint Diane Thomas, Secretary Pro Tem, for the August 17th, 2000 meeting of the Board of Education.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Diane. The next item is the approval of minutes. If in your orange folder, you will see minutes of the May 25th regular Board of Education meeting as amended. Has everyone had a chance to look at those? Okay. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the May 25th, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education as amended.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. July 20, 2010 minutes. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the July 20th, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented. That is in your folder, in your binder.
I would note one change on page 5. The last person voting aye should probably be Thomas.
Where are you?
Page 5, last person voting aye
Oh,
should probably be Thomas.
so, okay, change that. Okay, anything else? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the July 20th, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education as amended.
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Judy, I abstain.
All right. Next item is public comment. Are there any public comments?
Closed session
I'm
for
sorry.
July 20th.
I'm sorry. Got ahead of myself. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the July 20th, 2010 closed session of the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Again, Judy, I abstain.
Okay, now, public comments. Are there any public comments?
Good evening, my name is Mike Graham. I'm one of the Miller families. Just wanted to say thank you to all the support of the school district, the neighbors, the community as a whole, the board for all of your support with the new playground, both for Miller as well as the tremendous enhancements at Manning. This past weekend we had a successful event where we raised more money than we needed, it ends up, for the playground equipment itself. And so we spent that money on additional materials and installed it ourselves with volunteer labor. Some of you were there, so thank you very much. And there were many Miller families, there were Manning families, there were from the junior high, from the high school, from graduates of Miller. One of the gentlemen said that, oh, I went to Miller back when it was Central, which tells you it was a few years ago. And there were neighbors there that don't have any kids at all. And it was just absolutely tremendous to see so much outreach within the community to make it such a tremendous successful event. There were some great surprises with the tree trimming that took place and the extra equipment that we had to get it all done on time and on schedule. And a tremendous shout out, if you will, to Mike Maris for all of his help. Instrumental in making all of it happen. Couldn't have happened without Mike, so thank you very much. So that's all. I just wanted to, I know we're on TV, so I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that that happened. Stop by Manning and Miller to see the great enhancements that took place, and it's truly because of the effort of the community as a whole that those projects were able to take place with the private and the public funding. It made a huge difference for the schools as a whole. So thank you.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about the dedication?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's a dedication for Miller's Playground on September 17th when we're going to have our ice cream social. I believe it's going to be at 4:30 in the afternoon. So please come for the dedication. By then, all of the enhancements will be complete. We're going to be having some sealing done on the parking lot and creating a better basketball area. New basketball hoops are being installed, soccer nets, So there's more coming, but it will all be before the dedication itself. And so we look forward to a great event then, too.
Well, Mike, can I just say, thank you to you and the rest of the Miller parents and the committee for stepping up and really taking on this project. I think this, as far as I feel, this is like one of the things we heard at the forum was how parents want to be more involved and help with projects, and I think this was a real good start. Saturday was a lot of fun. The Boy Scouts were there. I got a chance to talk to Mr. and help me pronounce his name, Vitito.
Vedito.
Vedito.
Yep. Of Vedito tree trimming.
Tree trimming, and they donated all of their time, and so I thanked him very much for that. And it was nice to see the community come out to do that. So.
Thank you. Well, it was my pleasure. More to come.
Well, that's enough. Anyway,
We're going to hold you there.
yeah. Remember, we're taping. So anyway, I hope the children of Miller enjoy their playground.
Thank you. And Manning.
But the-
and
Manning.
Manning's,
Manning's
there were
It's
about
been
$30,000 of upgrades within their playground, and
Right.
I've heard through the community just a tremendous amount of positive feedback for what's happened there, too, for the usability of the structure itself for the entire community, so that's great.
Well, thank you for your
And the
help.
Park District was instrumental in all this,
The
too.
Park District as well. Well, anyway, thank you, and September 17th is the dedication and ice cream social. So,
Thanks.
thank you.
All right.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Consent agenda. Does anybody have any thing to discuss on that?
I just had a couple of questions on the capital development grant. As far as the two portions of money, the 2.2 million that the district is required to put into this project, how is that money maintained? Is that something that has to be kind of set aside and maintained so that we know we have that money? Because we have, 2 years to obligate all of the funds?
There's two ways. One is for the board to set aside the 2.2 to make sure they have it on hand. And then another possibility, some of the improvements that are currently taking place at Manning and Miller can go towards that 2.2 million. So actually, for our district, we'd probably be looking at a lower total because we're already making some enhancements that were already part of that original proposal. And we can, work through Mike and Kim and figure out exactly what we'd be able to put towards that amount and come up with a, concrete dollar amount that the district would need to have in order to accept that funding.
So does that mean we could put in, because we've already done some things, we would get some money back? Out of this one, is that what you're saying, or am I misunderstanding?
If the grant is for 1.2 million, and that's roughly 1/3 of the total project that was proposed. And so the district was responsible for roughly 2/3 of the cost. So, and you don't start receiving reimbursements until you start generating bills for what you're paying for. But the state does want to see that you have, at least the revenue source before they'll release those funds. So I would recommend that we actually utilize some of what we've already spent towards that 2.2.
I see.
So
Okay.
therefore, the district is responsible for coming up with
I see.
with
Okay.
a lower amount. And this, just so that you know, what you're approving tonight is just to reserve those dollars for the district. There is no obligation on the district's part if we decide that we really don't want to go forward with any projects, we don't want to spend the dollars. The state will, utilize those funds elsewhere, but there's no obligation on our part for approving it tonight.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Anything else on any other item in the consent agenda? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Personnel recommendations, employment of staff, certified and non-certified staff recall. 2, certification of hazardous crossing. 3, board authorization of vehicle. 4, capital development board grant. And 5, ratification of regular payroll. A roll call, please.
So moved.
Oh, sorry.
Second.
I'm nervous with Shannon.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Next item is superintendent's report.
The first item in my report is Steve Cashman, the architect's proposal. If you recall, at our last board meeting, the board directed me to meet again with Mr. Cashman along with Kim Anderson and Mike Mayoris, and to talk about the proposal and see if possibly we could rework that a little bit and get that cost down. And Steve did rework the proposal. You received a copy of it in your board update, but then there's also in your orange folder a copy of it. I invited Mike and Steve here this evening so that they could be a part of our conversation and answer the board's questions, so that hopefully we can reach consensus on, the direction if we would like for Steve to undertake the study on our behalf, or what the wish of the board would be.
Okay.
Steve, you want to start, or should we just start asking
Why don't you-
questions?
You'd be more than happy to ask questions.
Okay. I had spoken by way of information with Kathy Casey, and it was a question I had as well. One of the scope changes was to look at Miller in the
Right.
project, and actually you're proposing, and we may have suggested this as well, and so I'll just chalk it up to communication, but at a replace of Miller, which I don't believe in our facilities committee recommendations, we actually went that far in terms of a recommendation at Miller.
Correct.
So for the time being, I would personally suggest that a replace of Miller, having served on that committee, it's a structure that clearly is old, but it is functional with respect to spaces, and there's clearly work to be done on mechanicals. There's clearly work to be done in terms of entrances and stuff like that, but is it your sense that a replace is really sort of a necessity there?
There's a big difference between Manning and Miller, and I would agree with you that Miller has many advantages over Manning, especially mostly in age. It's a much younger school. It was just my understanding and you could easily take the information, the cost to replace Manning, it would be similar to replace Miller, so you'll know the answer to the question if you chose to do that.
Okay.
It creates a very large price tag to replace 2 elementary schools at the same time. So
Yeah.
I think you could come up with a combination where you could, if you chose to, you could replace Manning and do extensive renovations and do additions at Miller and come up with equitable, educational programs or building programs at each campus. There obviously would be differences because of what new construction might allow you to do that you might never be able to accomplish at Miller.
Understood.
A couple of the questions that, after the last meeting when we talked, it seemed as though the board was all like on the same page, but we were coming at it from different ways. So the question that I think that I know that I have is, in terms of the entirety of this project, in terms of we're looking at Manning School, we're looking at Miller School, whether we make renovations to either school
Correct.
or create a new Manning, and additionally talking about one of the items that was high on the facility report, which was enclosing the rooms at the high school.
Right.
So the question that I know that I have is, one of the things that we have to do is find out from our community what our community wants. And of course, to do that, we have to know what we're talking about. So it's kind of like we have to juggle it all at the same time.
Correct.
So the question is, in terms of what you need from us, because I remember at the Building and Grounds Committee meeting that you had were at, and you were talking about, well, what the bill looks like or what the cost, is based on what we as a district want.
Correct.
So for instance, it's been talked about whether the district office maintains their offices at Manning or perhaps moves to a different building.
Right.
So the question that I know that I had was, what's the time frame for that? Are we supposed to be making some of these decisions and then coming to you, or how do you know what to put together? Does that make sense, or are we?
No, it actually totally makes total sense, because you could just, take Manning example. You could simply, renovate the infrastructure, which is obviously aged, but to just do that, like I kind of referred to in the report, would be a shame, because you're impacting comfort and, some safety issues, but are you really addressing improvements in the educational environment? To do that and then not address, the needs of the teacher-student relationship would be a shame. So I think probably the biggest guide I would use is the year-long process we had on the facility master planning and all the input that came from community members, principals, teachers, everyone on that group. And we would be stating our assumptions early on in the study, and then through Mike we'd be able to communicate those to you, and you could, if you obviously have other things that you see as needs that you wanted to include in the scope. We'd also keep it broad brush. Usually taking a building like Manning or Miller, either one, is usually to accomplish a reasonable and kind of economical renovation, something that's reasonable cost-wise, is usually a combination of renovation work and then some additions. Like, to just renovate Manning and not to do any additions, I don't think you could come up with a solution to some of the needs there. There's not a lot of space, breakout space. The principal's office is on the alley side. Security, accessibility is a major problem. An example would be like the restrooms. The infrastructure and the plumbing is in such bad shape that to renovate the restrooms, I don't know that that's the right solution versus getting at maybe stair and restroom tower additions, and then taking those restrooms and turning those into resource rooms or small meeting rooms, which are spaces that are clearly needed in Manning. So I think it'll be a combination, and what we'll do initially, because we have to have an assumption for like executive construction, who is the construction manager, will be working on the cost size, and for our engineers, I have to tell them in concept what we're talking about. What are we going to renovate? What are we going to add on to? And we'll put that down in drawings and have a kind of a short program, and then clearly you can see where that's heading. An example would be like Miller. There's differences between the two schools. Manning has, a cafeteria separate from the gym, and that's a positive because it was a junior high. It has a music room, which obviously Miller doesn't have. Miller's library is, in my opinion, very deficient. I mean, it was originally a storage room, and it's been converted into a library. So I see the two schools would have, on the renovation side, would have different additions. I think when it comes to the principal's office and security, they would obviously need something with elevators and access to the building. But then what do you do in the other spaces? Are you adding like a large space at Miller that would be a library, computer labs, large group spaces that would then allow other spaces in the building to be repurposed? Do you just renovate the nurse's office, or do you put that into an addition so you can create a brand new, effective nurse's office that addresses kind of the special needs that are so much more a part of education now versus these old-fashioned nurse's office? And then could that become, another space like a resource room? And it'd be a great spot for that. These old buildings, like you're familiar with Miller and Manning, the stairwells reflect their time. They're not enclosed fire stairs like you'd find in this building. They're open to this, the corridors, so this controlling the spread of smoke and fire, they're not that effective. So do you renovate those spaces like at Manning? You can picture the little offices are at the landings, or would it be smarter to put additions on with, say, like an elevator stair addition, maybe with restrooms, and then take those, remove the stairs, and make those into educational spaces? Like you could expand an adjacent classroom, or you could have a classroom and then a meeting space or a room between two classrooms. So we'll kind of lay that out on paper because I want you to look at it and see that, okay, that's for this point in time, without a lot of detailed design and programming, those are reasonable assumptions, and then the cost estimate will be built on that. And I think it was really interesting, the master facility planning process. It was a lot of back and forth, but in the end, themes started to develop. And it was really especially interesting to talk to the staff and where they saw the deficiencies. And, Manning being a fairly, it's a capacity building. One thing that came up very early in discussions is, do you move the administration someplace else to free up, effectively a classroom at least, and then a space adjacent to the library that could be a computer lab. Then you move the computer lab off the top floor, and that becomes, 1 or 2 classrooms. So you could start to create some great synergies, and those are things that we'll obviously look to that master plan and put into this study. But you'll have a chance to basically see what our assumptions are and to see if there's something else that you have in mind that you want to look at. The biggest thing is to make sure that we have an appropriate level of renovation and what I would call additions, because those additions could be something else, but you need to have the square footage included in the cost of that, so that whatever you decide to do, ultimately, you have a budget that reflects that. Cost estimating is a challenge because it's really, there's a lot of desire to kind of hold things down and to look at everything as being, really simple. And then once you get the money, you start to really think about your needs, and then suddenly you have scope creep. My responsibility and my charge here will be to really try to think out of the box and throw ideas out to you that you don't know, that you don't have in this district, so that you can decide to include those. So you have a reasonable range of costs. And that's what we're proposing here, is you'd have, for Miller, Manning, for a renovation scenario, it'll be a range. Because to say a number, we don't know enough to actually say this is the number that would cost to renovate and add on, because things change. What is the program really going to be? I mean, just deciding, what to build, that would take, 4 to 6 months of a normal design process. So we're doing an abbreviated process, but Mike will be really our communication to you and to the board, and we'd come back if we're throughout the process. We could come and just share our thoughts with you and show you what we're doing as we work. And I think the facility that having that already take place, that's really helpful. If that hadn't happened, it would be much more of a challenge.
And I guess what you just talked about, and thank you for that, is would be like a 4 to 6 month to try to figure that out. I guess is where the piece that I'm hearing you say, and I think that we have that, at least I know from my perspective, that we have that same concern, because to what extent, because at some point we have to involve our community and our taxpayers in terms of what is it that people want? Do people want to take these buildings and renovate them?
Right.
Or do we want to build new structures?
Right.
And so I guess that's the question. And so I think that was where we were last time, where what kind of ballpark figures are we talking about here? And
Well, so ideally, it sounds like, though, that you're building a work product that will help us engage that conversation with the community, because one of the things you mentioned in this revised scope, by virtue of reducing the revised scope, it was your opinion that you weren't going to provide enough information to go to a community with a referendum. Mm-hmm. It's really enough information to effectively try to engage our community in whatever forum we can.
Correct.
About here's what our options are.
Right.
And then ultimately, if we end up pursuing a set of options, then we would have to do some additional work to make those options more concrete in terms of numbers.
But this work would not be wasted. Like say you did a study and you chose to do a renovation approach to Miller and Manning. All this data and this information would be then something to be a starting point to then dig a little deeper, sharpen the pencil, give it a better point, and really dig in so you have a higher confidence level. Referendums are fascinating because I was telling Kevin this, it seems to be 2 schools of thought. Some come up with a really very broad description of the program, what they're going to do, and a very kind of rough estimate, but I mean really rough, and then they go to the community with the concept. Other ones will decide, okay, we want to do this. We want to renovate these 2 schools, and then we'll do a more detailed approach so that they actually have a design and can really show what it's going to be. And then the advantage is also timing, that if the referendum was approved, you've already done design work, so you can go forward. If you've done a really broad approach to it, if the referendum is approved, you're really at square one. You have to design a building. And I'd say most people err on doing a design because, in a way, you need to sell it to the community and the advantages of doing the project. And if you can't show that to them graphically and show them what they're going to get for their tax dollars, it's really a hard sell. I think you've seen it around here, how detailed, whether it's a village or a school district, how do they decide what they're going to do and how they're going to sell it.
Yeah. And I guess, I like what Dan said, too, that this what you're proposing now to us gets us to start.
Correct.
So that like we said, whatever way we do it, forums or focus groups and that with our community to start working with that, with Mike leading that and Kevin.
And get in a sense, too, I think it's really important, if you say, well, if you ask someone, do we want to renovate and add on or build new? Well, if everyone had unlimited funds, they'd say, well, let's just build new. But sometimes building new doesn't come with any challenges, and you're talking about building a new school, knocking down a school, do you have the land to do it, all those kind of challenges. Once you have an idea of the cost, you can decide really what you feel like the community would bear, or, how reasonable is it? 'Cause it's really difficult for people who are not involved in construction or design to have an idea what something costs. The high school is a great example. I mean, those classrooms have been open mostly since the building was constructed. I really see it as a major challenge to people to students that have any kind of, an A student might be able to overcome the acoustic distractions, but someone who's more borderline, it's amazing. But the reason they're still there is it's a hard nut to crack. You have a concealed spline ceiling, which is a nightmare. I mean, if you look at it closely, you'll see it's kind of like taking apart a puzzle and trying to put it back together. It never goes back together right. There's fire suppression, which that was a early school to have fire suppression. It's only in that classroom and area. And then you have the high-intensity discharge lighting, mechanical. So they kind of did what they could, but the rooms are huge for the class sizes, the spaces. And if you renovated that, you could create net new space, which could benefit, whether you're talking about leasing out spaces to SACIT or someone like that. But, what is the program? And you'll see kind of in the description here, and we've talked about it a lot with Mike, would you really do those classrooms and not do the principal's office at the same time? Likely not, because you're tearing down the ceilings. I mean, you're getting into the sprinkler system. That school is really unique. It has 3 different fire services to it, which the fire department hates because they literally need pumpers for every connection. They want one point. So that would be part of this cost estimate, is to connect it together. So it's not surprising. After I got to know the building, now I understand why it hasn't changed, because it's just difficult to change. But once you know financially what that range of costs is, then you could decide, when and how you're going to go at it. And also the time. It's not a one summer project. It's going to be something that's going to span a couple, summers to get it done. So how do you work that?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think Mr. Price asked for at the last meeting, was to, if we could incorporate that, because that was one of the things that was high on the facilities report recommendation.
Correct. And we kind of need to, like I stated in here, there's no cost for that, adding that to this. D. James Construction was the general contractor 2 summers ago, and they were working in the high school. And just in their involvement there, we were brainstorming. I think the facility committee was underway. So we started saying, hey guys, would you be willing to do, I had asked a favor of them and said, would you be willing to look at this with us? And we had a number of meetings with them, with some subcontractors, prime subs, and they basically had started working on a rough estimate, a range of costs. And then they kind of, they kind of sat down on it, and then I spoke to them a month ago and said, can we get back on this? So I'm hoping that within the next month that they'll have their data that I can look at. But that will really help you to know, it's certainly not a $100,000 project, but where does it fall? And then how would you put that in your list of priorities? And I was, when I talked to Kim and Kevin about this report and how you want to revise, I thought it was smart on what you were asking, because it's important to look at, all the buildings. If you're going to invest in Manning, what about Miller? What about high school? Where you have deficiencies, try to help all the community, do a little bit for everybody, so that you're not just investing in one school and leaving the other ones to kind of feel like they're left out. And there's definitely ways. The Barrington School District is one of our clients. They have a bunch of elementary schools, and they're from all different eras. None of them are the same. And that was a big challenge for us, is how do you renovate and bring these up to their current educational program and make it so every community that feeds into these elementary schools, that they feel like they have this, they might be different, but they have the same types of resources. And in one case, one school might have needed a multi-purpose room added onto the gym. Another area that was less of a need, they needed, a classroom addition. So it was really a balancing. And what we did was not exactly the same for each school, but it brought them up to a standard that they felt was, in a broad level, was equal, and it was fair for all the community. And I think that's really important with Manning and Miller.
During the facilities committee work, one of the recommendations that came out of it is to investigate the development of an early childhood center at South. And did you do any kind of preliminary work as far as looking at South for that capacity, or is that just?
Through our review of South and our involvement in South and with the committee, we talked a lot about it and about whether it would be appropriate or not. That was really interesting because that came out of talking about Manning, which was kind of intriguing. And then your staff that are focused on early childhood, they were talking about where their deficiencies were and what they were looking for. And then this kind of conversation, the committee rose up like, well, what if you move that program and the administration to South? You then would, and I'm just kind of speaking what the committee said, is you then would have a certified, someone there, so you wouldn't have to have a principal and the cost of having a principal there at South, that there's be some advantage to having the two together, and then you'd free up room at Manning to allow Manning to function better, to have, some elbow room where you could create, other resource rooms, better classrooms. Like there's some spots in Manning in the original building where the classrooms are very small. I mean, they're postage stamp size, and then you go to an area that was built 20 years later, and they're better sized classrooms. Well, by moving the early childhood and the administration to South, could you then take those little classrooms and turn those into resource rooms and move those students into a better classroom? And that's where this came up, and I think we actually were in the process of doing the master facility plan, and then we stopped as a committee and wrote a letter to the board recommending serious consideration of moving the administration, because it seemed like the first domino, if that fell, that then there were opportunities at Manning without having to spend an enormous amount of money. So that was really where it came, and I have to go back in the timeline, but that came out before we issued the final master plan.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see from these scenarios you have listed here is that they're as broad as possible so that we can go to the community and ask some further questions on what they would like, and if that's on their mind at all. I think we should have, if there's a little piece that's already done that we can kind of include without adding a lot more to this proposal here, it would be great. So you would end up with a scenario one, basically renovating or possibly renovating all three of our elementary spaces, because that will be a question that comes up from the community. Why are you building more space here when you've got an empty school building here? And so, we want to have as many options available and reasons why that would be good or bad.
Absolutely. And then when we were even as a committee looking at that, it seemed that the level of renovation and investment that would be required at South to move those two programs, the administration and early childhood, was less extensive than the renovation needs at Manning. So that seemed as a positive too, like it could be the first step. And also it would help if you're doing renovation that you have some room to move people around. I mean, that's the biggest challenge. A summer construction period is 49 days. I mean, it's so difficult to get anything done in a summer period that, renovating Manning or Miller and doing additions would likely have to straddle both school years, doing some work that's separate from the students during the school year, and then renovating, multiple summers to work your way through the building. Because it's hard to change out the nervous system and the arteries, in that short a time. We did a renovation of a much older school than yours, Bennett Academy. It dates like 1901, and renovating that, we had to basically kind of first create the central plant, the heart and the lungs, and then once we had that built, and we did that during the school year, in the first summer we were able to start to get into the building and start renovating, and then we did an addition. So that kind of strategy is what we would envision at both schools. South would probably be something you could maybe get at in the summer, because it's really a mechanical infrastructure, kind of I'd say medium interior renovation, not as extensive as you'd see at Manning. Miller would obviously be, I think, a combination of more additions and minor interior renovation than the extensive renovation at Manning.
So as part of your final report, will there be information on South School?
We can add it. It would be something, it would still be very broad brush. That was one thing I was trying to explain to Kevin and Kim, is that how you paint, it's the size of the brush. And the broader, the faster the process, you end up with just a bigger range of numbers. But they're still valuable numbers, because you might look at it and say, we don't want to put that kind of money into, building a new school. It's just not reasonable. It's too much, not now. we can do this renovation. It would be a better approach and something that you'd be able to get at, say renovating Miller and Manning simultaneously, that it would be better for the overall community versus building a brand new school. I think it will be effective, and I can talk with the team. As a committee, we looked at it. I'm familiar with Mike, and I have talked at length about South and about what could happen there, so we could figure out what that would be and give you a range of costs. I think it would really make sense. I mean, to have the administration still at Manning after renovating it, because also the administration's in a way slightly fragmented. That there's some staff at the high school. Could you bring people together and free up space there on the technology side? So. We certainly can add South to the report.
And I guess that's, as we've been talking about these last couple of months, some of the comments and phone calls that I would get from people say the same thing. Well, a brand new building would be just great, but that would be very hard to do in this economy. It might not. That could be what the community is willing to do. And I guess that's the thing that gets back to my original question was, if when we're looking at this, are we talking about, moving some things around, taking the building, renovating it so that it could sustain for another 10, 15 years?
Right.
I don't have the answers to that, but that's what I'm hoping that you can help us with in terms of dealing with our community and helping answer some of these questions, which then gets me to that first question in terms of, looking at some of the things that had already been looked at before.
And I think that's what we'll start with the recommendations from the facility master plan and look at all those and say, okay, what are we addressing, what aren't we addressing? And that's something, once we kind of get going, I could maybe come back and just talk to you about, okay, here's what we think right now, based on what that committee said and where we are in doing this study, and see if it makes sense to you. I mean, I really think, I remember even when we were on the facility committee, people were like, well, it's got to be cheaper just to knock this Manning down and build a new school. Well, don't we wish? But, when you look at Manning, it has some areas that are actually good spaces. You're talking about foundation costs. No one ever thanks me for putting in a foundation. That's like, I always say, take a lot of photos, because once you backfill, all that money, and sometimes it's a lot of money, you never see it again. The band room, you have the kitchen area. Obviously, the cafeteria seating area, it's, for an elementary school, it's actually not a bad space. The kitchen would probably use some upgrades. The gym, the supporting spaces on the gym need some help, but the gym itself, it's an old kind of historic gym. Do you do something like on the gym where you add on an addition next to it where it's a multi-purpose space where it could be the gym size with an operable partition, and then you can open it up to a bigger space for, say, bigger functions, or have the ability for two things to happen there at once? Those are the kind of things we'll brainstorm about, and we'll come back to you and show you, here's our assumptions. I guess timeline, if we go forward with the report, once we kind of make those assumptions, and it will be in either an outline format or bullets, we can share that with you, and then we can be continuing on. And then if you had feedback, and any time you can contact me, shoot me an email or whatever, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. Touring the buildings, I offered that to Kim and Kevin and to Mike. I think that's a great opportunity, to walk the buildings, and I'd be more than happy to do tours with you, so we can just talk about specific areas, like where I see the weaknesses of Miller, where I see the weaknesses of Manning. What about South? I guess the only place we haven't talked about is junior high. Ironically, that is probably one of your stronger buildings, just because it was rectilinear, it was easier to enclose. There's some inequity in spaces because they didn't make all the classrooms the same size, but and now it's going to have new windows. It has new principal's office, so security's better there. But that was also, I think, helpful. That kind of principal's office where someone has to enter through the principal's office, just can't come into the building. That's I think what we'd want to envision at South. Maybe a smaller version at South if it's a preschool program, but certainly at Manning, at Miller. For both of them, having the principal's office one floor up from grade is not ideal by any sense. So we certainly can come back, and I think then the tours, I would really stress, I think that's really helpful. Whenever we do design, if you decide to build, it's helpful to break mental chains, to go out and talk and just imagine something different. Because if not, it's really tough when you've been in a building or working with a building for years. You just think it has to be this way, like you can't knock that wall down, you can't do this and that. And by just walking together and, having a dialogue, sometimes, ideas will emerge. And so if you're interested at all, I'd be more than happy to give tours of any of those buildings and talk about it. We did it a lot with the facility committee, and it was very helpful.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, does
Yeah, I agree.
everybody? Would this also be a good time, just hearing you and talking about this, to talk about like a subset committee to work on this? I know, Mike, it's not like you don't have enough on your plate, but would that be something we would want to address to see? I know we're going to talk about committees later, and there is a standing committee, but since this is such a huge endeavor, did we want to talk about
I think it would be, I know it would be helpful for our team,
Yeah.
because if you took the, Buildings and Grounds Committee or created a different committee, but met at a more rapid pace as we're working on this study, it would allow us to have that dialogue and for you to kind of see it develop. I'd rather not develop this thing in a black room and come out and go, here's the report. I want you as involved as much as possible, because then it makes the final result of the report more valid. You really, a good architect really, in a way, helps you design what you want, not the other way around. Not just design and say, here's your final, don't you love it? That's not my version of design, of good design.
Because that's another thing. I've had people contact me and say, are you putting together any kind of a committee? Do you need volunteers for that? Do we want to think about something along those lines as we're to assist?
We certainly talked about the notion of reconvening the facilities committee
That's true.
after that, the initial report where we talked about, general parameters. So, reconvening that committee, or some form of that committee, or, certainly I think would be, in conjunction with this work, wouldn't be a bad idea. That committee was, 20-plus people, and I don't know that Steve wants a committee like that size this time around, but...
I have no problem on committee size. So. I think the more input, the better. You can never have enough input.
But, we certainly talked about reconvening that facilities committee based on board and district response to the report. So, I don't think it'd be a bad idea.
I know we're going to talk about it later again, strategic planning, but I almost see this as really one, you had on the last strategic plan facilities and buildings, and this seems like that would fit into the strategic plan. Is it possible to start this portion of the strategic plan maybe ahead of some of the other, or does it all have to transpire at the same time?
No, it doesn't all have to transpire at the same time, and I would agree that my guess is that as you take a look at your strategic plan and update and revise it, facilities would be, a portion of that, a segment of that. And so it does make sense that this would be, the correct direction to go in terms of, your strategic plan, your planning for the future. This definitely is in line with that. And so, I would recommend that that would become part of the strategic planning process, and there would be your group, your committee that would be working with Steve in developing that.
The question is just chicken and egg, whether you want a strategic plan conversation before this work or that sort of builds on this work. I would err to the side of a strategic plan process that builds on this work.
Would it be, just because of what you're saying here, would it be helpful to have a smaller group to work with and then expand on that? Because we can, just again, see if the people who run the facilities committee are interested in continuing, or if, additional people want to join on that, since it's been a few years. To get, new blood into that, in that process. Do we want to, would that help you? Because I think...
It would certainly help. Because, you could design the same renovation or a building, 100 different ways, 1,000 different ways. I think it's important that there's going to be assumptions or things that we might put down initially on paper where people are like, well, I really never really thought about doing that. Why would you do that? And then that it kind of gets the juices flowing, and then, there could be ideas coming back, because that just suddenly say, well, I like that, but what if we did this instead? Like the Miller would be a great example. When we first toured there, we had the old original construction drawings is what we were looking at. So Mike goes to take me up these steps, and I'm thinking, we're going to a storage room. And he opens the door, and it's the library. I'm like, so my first question was, where was the library before? You know, I don't even know where it was. I mean, we never really saw it. So, you know, but I looked at it and I said, okay, you know, it's up a half a flight. You know, it's terrible when it comes to accessibility. It's a very narrow, long space, which is not ideal from a, you know, management, a supervision point of view, or just having, you know, proper library layout. So, I mean, could that be something? Could that be better off? You know, and then Mike said, well, we're short of storage, so we could always use a storage room. So, you know, then we started talking about an addition. But prior to seeing that room, I mean, the idea of doing a library addition was not even talked about. You know, the entrance to Miller, or to Manning, you know, it's off of an alley, the main entrance, which is not ideal. You know, can you create a space along Manning, along Linden, where you have some visitor parking, you have a drop-off, you have, you know, an ability to get to that, you know, partial level up with ramps or elevators, and have supervision of the entire Linden exposure from a principal's office, you know, that has maybe a new nurse's office connected to it, and then, you know, the nurse's office becomes another resource room, or you expand the classroom that's next to it. I think when we start putting things on paper, all of you and other, you know, other people that were on the committee will start to get excited and thinking about what it could be. And in this, for this report, we don't have to have the answer, but we just need to make sure that we've considered anything that you're interested in, that we have it somewhere in the mix. You know, exactly how that principal's office would be designed, that's not important, but we need to know, okay, how big would it be? And then we make sure we have that square foot cost. You know, are we just going to keep the gym there, or in same at Miller, or would you be interested in having, you know, multi-purpose spaces that are connected to the gym to allow multiple functions to go on at the same time? Miller, you know, the art room that's off of the gym, when I saw that, it really made me think that that might have been a cafeteria type space, like a seating space, so where it's adjacent to the kitchen, it's off the gym. Could that be a seating area where you're not having to kind of shut down the gym during lunch periods and then open it back up? You know, was there another design? Could that art room move someplace else? Someplace else. So I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see how it works. I think, you know, considering the role of SACIT at Miller, you know, the spaces they're using, you know, is that going to continue? You know, kindergarten classrooms. Manning has a kindergarten classroom with at-grade access, which follows state of Illinois guidelines. Miller's is down, you know, half level. There's not direct access from the kindergarten classroom outside, which is not recommended. So is the idea to move the kindergarten classroom to the west end, where you're at grade, add a restroom there, and then repurpose the kindergarten classroom to something else? So I think once we start showing you things, you're going to have a lot of questions, but that's good. That's what we want. We want to make sure that you look at it and you get excited and you have ideas, and having some kind of committee that's able to give us Mike and I feedback would be crucial. Whether that's just the Buildings and Grounds Committee, you know, a 2 or 3 person, you know, board group, and then, you know, Kim and Mike or whatever, or is it a bigger group? Any size would certainly help me and help our team.
I'd like the idea of the committee. I just worry about time management. The bigger the committee, the harder it is to keep onto a time budget.
Right.
And especially at this early age, not to exclude or to not get those extra ideas, but just to get this ball rolling. My concern is the bigger the time management becomes a monster.
Right. Well, Dan's smiling.
I'm just sitting here thinking, part of the reason we met for 15 months,
right,
and we met basically every other week for the better part of an hour and a half or 2 hours. And my recollection is that part of the and you know, Rob can recall some of this as well, that part of the reason I think those conversations and those meetings went on for so long, both at the time and in duration, a number of months, is because it's such a big conversation, and
huge.
It's a huge conversation.
Okay.
And so, you know, there was even some frustration at the board level of how long that process took. So, to Diane's point, yes, it's critical to figure out. And I think what I'm hearing is to sort of bring to, or try to bring to point, is that other than changing the scope in a couple of areas in this proposal, you know, the inclusion
right,
of something with respect to South, you know, not necessarily looking at a full replace on Miller.
Right.
We are inclined, it sounds like, to create or reconvene something of a facilities committee to make sure that, you know, that Steve has the right direction for the type of things that he would include in a renovation of Miller, a renovation of South, or improvements at South, and a renovation and/or a rebuild at Manning. So, and then any feedback that the committee might want to bring with respect to the work that you'd be looking at in the high school, although the high school work probably is more defined by the space than by the ideas necessarily. But in any case, it sounds like that's the path we're going on. And
Yeah.
my recollection of the facilities committee, just my recollection of it was that we had the superintendent pull it together. The business manager, in conjunction with Steve, ran that committee, and then ultimately we produced a report. And I think, I'd love, that process, I think, worked.
Right.
It was, however, elongated. So hopefully, we can use the same or a similar process without the elongation.
I mean, it was actually an educational process, too, because I thought special education and the student services that you deliver as a district, it was kind of this hidden problem that no one, you don't see when you walk into Miller or Manning and realize that there's, two aides, behind a partition in the corner of a classroom supposedly delivering, assistance to a student, or they're pulling them into hallways. As you always, if you walk through Manning during the school day, you'll see desks out there and an aide helping a student. Well, it's not exactly ideal, but it's not a classroom, it's not a specific function, but it's a big part of what you do as a school district. And that was, that discussion went on for weeks, and actually, I think was the kind of the catalyst for the discussion about South was there's this deficiency that's kind of hidden, like invisible, but it's you make do. The staff are amazing. You give them any kind of building, and they will figure out a way to teach those children and help them. But is it ideal? Are they just making do? And that's what they're doing. They're just getting creative, finding places, going down, in the community room and finding a corner and meeting with the student there, pulling a desk out in the hallway. But it's certainly not ideal. Those are the things that our discussions would go on because no one even realized it was a problem until we started talking about it. And you have such a resource in your staff. I think it would be crucial to, get the principals involved, some key people to represent the different communities of Manning, Miller, South, the high school, to make sure that those voices are heard, whatever size you decide to have.
Well, keeping in mind the strategic plan, do we want to have, do we agree? Do we want to have you put together who would like to be on that group that would be perhaps former members of the facilities committee, if they want to, if there's other people that would like to participate, and having and that could lend itself to the strategic planning portion of it? Does that make sense? It sounds like we're all in the same
I'd like to
vein.
keep the strategic planning piece out of it for right now, until we decide what we're doing. Personally, I'd like to reconvene whoever wants to that's already been on the facilities committee.
Right.
Because they've already been heavily involved if they still want to move forward. And if there's anybody else in the community that wants to come on board, just to keep it to a decent sized group. I completely agree. Otherwise, we're going to be back at a whole year of doing this. But I think the word strategic plan, I would like to see kept separate from this for the time being. It can always be tied into that, but we're not ready to go down that road yet, strategic plan, are we? I know we're talking about it, but for now, I think this needs to be kept separate.
I think you're saying,
Yeah.
I think something similar to what I said earlier, which is we should use this effort,
Yeah.
as a building block to the strategic plan,
Fine.
as opposed to trying to do them concurrently, simultaneously, in other words, this actually is timely, important, and gives us definition and scope to the conversation in the strategic plan. And so
Yeah,
I'd argue that this is a precursor to a strategic conversation going forward.
I would anticipate you would see a lot of the same people involved in that branch of the strategic plan, and it would just kind of,
Maybe.
at some point,
Not
merge into
necessarily.
it.
Maybe, not necessarily. There's clearly, some folks who have moved on or are doing different things at this point, but, I'm sure a number of the staff who participated would still, would still be available and hopefully be willing to participate in that effort.
Does that sound?
Yeah, I just have one question. Once this committee is reconvened, your proposal has very specific number of hours for different activities.
Right.
Who in this process, kind of to Diane's point, has the responsibility or the accountability for staying on track? Because your proposal assumes a certain number of hours, a maximum, and a dollar amount. This could very easily get away from us. Who owns being accountable to that schedule?
Well, in this proposal, I make it Mike Mayors. So, that basically, he would be the person to communicate, between what our team's doing, because we're going to need really extensive involvement with Mike on all kinds of levels. I mean, you could put 10 different types of mechanical systems in Manning, and they all have different, benefits and problems. So
That discussion could go on for a long period of time if someone doesn't say,
well,
okay.
Well, I think we're going to be the ones saying, slow down, because this is, to be able to do this for this reduced fee and the increased scope, we need to move quickly.
Okay.
That's why I kind of describe it, painting with a big paintbrush you use on the siding on a house. This is not going to be, a fine, where we're down to every, how many square feet of brick or whatever. We're going to use broader data, but that allows us to move quickly. I still think the data and the results are going to be really helpful to you. In a way, you'll be starting strategic planning, you'll know enough about, okay, what kind of order of magnitude are we costing here? What's the cost to build a new school? What's the cost to renovate and add on? And knowing those will give you some guidance on how you want to go. You'll have a lot of different options to look at. Where do you put, how does it happen? What's the timeline? I mean, do you get at the high school, at the same time? Is that a future project,
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we all are. So we've got these ideas, the facilities committee report. I guess now it's time to get going on this and look at what the numbers are, take it to the community and see what we want to do, what we can do.
And I think it will also help you, like in some cases, that 5-year plan that was previously established. I mean, there were things in there, like work at Manning, that's basically been on hold because Manning was the question, what's going to happen there. If you decided just in a broad level that you're going to not knock it down, well then, can you do things and make immediate improvement? Working towards, it's a multi-step process to get to where you want to be versus you got to do it all at once. I mean, that's really why, when you look around Illinois, most school districts do a lot of renovations and additions because it's more manageable to do that than to knock down and replace schools. It's just, that's really hard, and you're dumping that on a group of taxpayers versus spreading it out every year. And like we talked about just south, if you did do something with preschool and the administration, Manning would immediately benefit from that. And you could then do something over at Miller and improve that, accessibility. You would do an elevator addition there and improve right away the accessibility of Miller, versus using a lift. So, but you'd know enough that you can start making plans and knowing that you're not going to, in a way, make an investment that you're going to tear out years later. That's the one thing you do not want to do is paint yourself in the corner or, spend money that you're then going to have to renovate or pull out. So.
Does anybody have any other questions on what's in front of us?
Well, so I think the question then becomes how do we proceed on this? Should we have Steve change the scope based on change or revisit his letter based on this conversation, and then we can approve it at sort of a next meeting, or how do?
I mean, I certainly adding south, not doing the replacement on Miller. We could do it for this proposal.
Okay.
I mean, because in a way, we're taking off having to focus on Miller on a new school, but we're adding, some renovation work at South. So,
okay.
In my mind, that's where this went from me to TNM to.
That's really what I was getting at. Was that?
Okay.
So,
we can approve this with an addendum or something, adding South, taking the.
Correct. I could revise this and just add that language in there that we're going to not replace Miller, do a replacement study on Miller, but we would add looking at renovating South. And
do we agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody like that? And then we can move forward and start looking at.
I'll pull the facility committee, and that'll be the starting point to form that committee.
Yeah.
And then have, further conversations with Steve and Mike and Kim, and we'll get that committee going and up and running. Okay.
And yeah, seeing if the people on that committee are still interested, or if we have new people that are interested in that.
I mean, if ultimately this is going to be going out for a referendum of these big dollar amounts here. You want to have as many people
Right.
involved without making it cumbersome like you're talking about, because they're going to spread and share information out in the community.
Ultimately, I think our challenge is going to be, after this process is done, it's something we're going to have to think about, is how do we engage the community in a meaningful conversation that gets us meaningful feedback so that we know what direction to go on the referendum question? And I'm just thinking purely about mechanics about how to do that. Is that a survey? Is that, a couple different town hall meetings? Is that, because it's going to be an imperfect gauge of whatever the community is. The perfect gauge is the referendum. So the imperfect gauge is the thing that we're going to have to struggle with.
Well, and it may be that we have to do all of those
All of
things,
those
and a
That's
couple
what I
more
was
that we
saying.
haven't
Yeah,
thought
well, I'm
of yet,
just-
so.
Probably looking at several different ways of communicating it and getting feedback. So,
Like, one of the things you said, like, it's not a perfect scenario, but, we have a great staff who find the way to do it. So maybe the question is, do we find another way to do it as opposed to redo everything? You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's a very good point that we have to start.
Right, and the dialogue, having a dialogue on referendum, it's always important to make sure you get supporters and naysayers both together, because the people who are, like an inherent, like default no vote, well, why? That's the important thing. Is it just a money issue? Is it they feel like, enrollments are going back down? How current is your demographic study? And just keeping them involved, because if you get too many of the supporters and no naysayers, then you can get some big, terrible surprises and be totally off, kilter with what you're doing. But the facility committee was great. I mean, they were very energized. We had a really high turnout. I mean, we met a lot, and we really had pretty good representation. And I know when they formulated back then, they had a broad enough representation that if someone didn't make it, there was still someone there from the Miller community to, represent that group. And then they kind of were the ones, in a way, that were communicating back and forth. And that's what we would see in some of our meetings, where suddenly they must have been, at a picnic or something, and all of a sudden they had new questions for the group, and then we would talk about and debate them. And it was.
Okay, do we have any other questions then? Or we have?
Nope.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Are you ready,
And also,
Mike?
any tours, if you ever want to, please. I think that would be very helpful.
That sounds like that would be a
Yes.
good thing. Maybe we can
yeah, we
work on
can
that.
work on scheduling that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Then next in my report, the board and the school district has contracted with School Exec Connect, Linda Hansen. The strategic plan needs to be updated, revised, and so just to update the board, I did contact Linda, and we are meeting September 1st to talk a little bit about next steps and what that process will look like. And after that meeting, then I'll have more information to share with the board. But basically, what she somewhat is recommending is kind of an umbrella committee that's going to more or less determine, the direction of the strategic planning process. And typically, then you have subcommittees that run along the lines of finance. You might have technology, facility planning, and something along the lines of school improvement or curriculum would be a piece. And then, it's the subcommittees that do a lot of that work. And then ultimately, you bring it all together and start to put together that final strategic plan for the next 5 years for the district. So after that September 1st meeting, I'll be able to share a little bit more information with the board and let you know the timeline and the next steps for us. Just our opening institute, we're opening our school year Monday, the 23rd, and we're opening, we'll have all of our employees at the high school at 8 o'clock in the morning for a welcome breakfast, and then we transition to the auditorium for some welcoming remarks. And I'd like to invite the board, if you're available to attend the breakfast and our opening remarks, you're more than welcome to attend that. Each month, what I want to start doing is a superintendent's coffee. And the first one I have scheduled is September 16th at 7 o'clock p.m. at Westmont Junior High. And I'll rotate them between the buildings. And just so that you know kind of what that looks like, typically I have a brief presentation for the attendees. it's usually somewhat seasonal in terms of what's going on in the school district at that time. And, we'll talk a little bit about facility planning because obviously that's an issue that we're doing in the strategic plan for the district. And then after that, it's pretty much an open agenda and questions anybody who is present that have of me or the district, I can answer those. And then you as board members are welcome to attend as well, to be a part of those conversations. And so each month we'll be scheduling those and we'll be rotating those. But the first one will be the 16th of September at 7 o'clock p.m. at the junior high. So again, if you're available, feel free to attend that.
And I know, we talked about this a little bit. We'll be sending that information out
Yes.
to the families
Right,
and
I'll be
community.
working with Judy to get it publicized in our papers and notifying our community as well as our parents so that hopefully we get pretty good turnout and some good conversation with our community.
Well, you might now, since we're talking about the facilities.
Could very well. And then also included is the student recognition schedule for the year. And if before you leave this evening, Marie has the kind of the official list, if you could sign up for those building recognitions and then also the board recognitions. Shannon had a question about the junior high. If you know, it's not noted board recognition. But I do know that, yes, they do bring students to the board for recognition. As a matter of fact, the June board meeting I attended, some junior high students were being recognized. And so I'm working with Mr. Fiala to, kind of pencil in those dates, and we'll share those with the board so that you're aware of those dates as well. But indeed, the junior high does bring students before the board for recognition. And then one other thing is in your orange folder, the DuPage Division Fall Dinner is September 29th. And if there are any board members who would like to attend, the agenda and the speakers are listed. Please let Judy know, and she'll make the reservations for the district.
Who was our rep to,
No, that's just for the conference you're thinking of, the rep. That we have no
for
rep.
DuPage? Oh, for DuPage? Okay.
This is IASB.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I was under the impression we had a rep to the ISB DuPage division, but,
No,
okay.
just a delegate when we go to the conference.
Okay.
And then the last thing I'll reference, unless there's any questions, in the legislation, I have gotten a couple of questions about House Bill 6041, which has to do with the distribution of working cash bonds. And that's been or I should say transfer of working cash funds, because there's a difference between bonds and funds. And basically what I was able to find out is that legislation makes reference to working cash funds. They can be transferred to any other fund. Prior to that, there was some limitations as to where you could transfer those dollars to. Those dollars, though, are not dollars that revenue you receive from the issuance of bonds. Those are the dollars that are either the interest from investments from the bonds, or if you levy for working cash funds. When you issue bonds are issued for an intent. And in 2007, those bonds were issued for capital outlay, and they're non-taxable bonds. If the district were to utilize those as operating, those are taxable bonds, and the IRS is going to get involved, and there's going to be heavy penalties for that. So that legislation is referring more towards referring to the interest, and then if you actually levied for working cash, then those levy dollars would be the ones you'd be able to utilize in the various capacities.
Thank you.
So the working cash that we have now is on the bonds for capital projects.
Correct.
So
Those were issued for a specific
throw that
purpose.
to Mike right now and get him.
Now, it doesn't mean that, for instance, in 2007, there may have been some projects the district was looking at, and maybe the needs have shifted a little bit. As long as it falls into capital outlay, it's okay to utilize those funds in that manner, but it has to fall under the capital outlay.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, did you have anything else?
No, that's...
Okay. Okay, then, board reports. One of the first things that we should talk about is reviewing board committee assignments. And now that Shannon is on the committee with us, on the board with us, we should look at, number one, if everybody is happy with the committees that they currently serve on, if anybody wants to make any changes, and then to potentially invite Shannon to serve on a committee. And in the past, we had talked about revising the way our committees are put together, so this would probably be a good time to talk about that. Let's open that discussion in terms of what our current committees look like. And
Well, I'm fine where I'm at.
okay,
Okay with that.
okay.
Well, and the opening appears to be on the Finance Committee, which I'm certainly interested in,
Okay,
capable of doing, I think.
is that,
I'm fine with where I'm at.
I think that would be fantastic.
okay? Okay. Any other discussion on that? Do we want to,
The only thing I would like to say, I know we've talked a little bit about it in the past, is opening up committees for more members. To me, it seems a little bit restrictive to just have the Finance Committee with just 2 people, Policy Committee with 2 people. If it makes sense to have other either staff or community members participate. And I know I said it before, but the Building and Grounds Committee meeting, and it took place when we were talking about the budget and the budget cuts a couple of months ago, but the one where we had a number of community members present, I thought was actually a very productive and interesting meeting, because we got a lot of input, a lot of questions that maybe wouldn't have come from just the 2 board members of the committee. So, I certainly would be fine with somehow getting some additional individuals on committees, or at least having additional opportunity to participate if they do come to the meeting. So, for example, in a policy committee meeting, if we decided just to leave it at 2 people, that Kathy and myself would come and kind of do the nuts and bolts of the stuff that needs to be done, but then there would be an opportunity to open it up to additional staff or community members to at least kind of not just make a public comment, but actually bring something to the table to discuss, or if they had questions and that sort of thing.
Those committee meetings have always been an open meeting, so anybody was free to attend any of the committee meetings.
Correct.
So
Have we made an invitation previously, or are
it's
people
always
aware?
been posted,
Posted,
yes.
okay.
Yeah, because they're board committees, they obviously, they're subject to open meetings notices, so they're posted, and depending on how many people are there, who's there, there's always, because they're not full board meetings and they're not as formal a setting, there's, my experience has been that they're always more informal, they're always more give and take, and there's always more sort of conversation between people in the room. So it's, my experience has been that it's not so staid and quiet, and certainly, feedback and participation has been encouraged as opposed to discouraged, has been my experience.
And, and to the agenda too, I've seen it done where you can add public comment to the agenda, and it can occur at the beginning, the end. So, if you want that, to provide that opportunity, it can be done.
Just as a side note, I'll observe that we'll be talking about a preliminary budget here shortly, and I think at a certain level, we know what's coming, and I think there's an opportunity to talk there about the notion of effectively an adjunct finance committee, where we do open up that conversation to participants in the committee at the staff level, because we have a fairly profound going forward problem. The question is just when to do that committee, because there's a couple other dominoes that I think need to fall before we do something like that.
I know I have had the same concerns in the past with, we've had people volunteer to be on different committees. And is that, and I know just from my research that other districts have things like that. So have you ever seen anything like that in your?
Not
looking at-
exactly, no. Yeah.
Okay. So the only people that would be on committees are board members?
Typically, it's the board members are the committee, but then there are community members there, and there is exchange between the committee members and the audience.
Okay. Any other?
Well, I think that's, I mean, if we kind of openly encourage that, that would be a step in the right direction as far as I see it, at least to be more inviting on our board committees, to let people know, other than just posting them, but just maybe send out a little notice that if you have an interest in a particular issue or something, that the meeting is here, and we plan on having an opportunity for a little more open dialogue, because it's a little more, less formal setting, I guess.
And do we know if there are staff, people, administration, anyone in the administration that's interested in participating in any of the committees?
Many times when I've been in a committee meeting, there's been other staff members involved, so yes.
Okay. And then I have a statement to read that the board had talked about in July. So I will read the board report regarding administrators' contracts. At the May 25th board meeting, there was a discussion about administrators' contracts, and there was some inaccurate information that the board would like to publicly correct. During this discussion, it was stated that all of the administrators' contracts were prepared by our general counsel incorrectly, and that the district office had to prepare all new contracts to fix the errors. It was stated that the district office had to spend time to correct these errors, and there was a cost associated with this. Following this meeting, the district received a FOIA request asking for the name of the law firm and the cost to the district to correct these alleged errors. After the board researched this issue by meeting with our attorney and former administrators, it has been concluded that these statements were incorrect. The truth is that the district received one template for the contracts, and then the district office was supposed to prepare separate contracts for each employee based on the one template. The district paid a minimal amount to the law firm for the one draft template as requested by the former superintendent. At this point, the board would like to publicly apologize to Terry Hodges, the district's general counsel, and her firm for any malice that was stated about her or her work product. The Hodges Law Firm has the highest ethical and professional standards, and we would like to apologize for anyone at District 201 suggesting otherwise. In addition, the district will forward a corrected FOIA response to the requesting party. And are there any other board reports before we move on to special ed? Then the next item on the agenda is special ed. Mr. Price is the board's representative to SACIT.
I actually don't have a report this month because there was no meeting, scheduled meeting in July for SACIT. So there's one next week, and so I should have some information for the next meeting.
Okay, then moving on to finance. Karen?
Do you want the budget presentation first, or the
Well,
or the financials?
we can review the tentative budget. Do you want to do that first?
Okay, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you tonight. That's just a brief overview, high-level overview of the detailed packet of information that you received. Okay, the first slide just recaps the fund balance summary. And as you can see, in the operating funds, our expenditures exceed our revenues. We have an anticipated ending fund balance in the operating funds of a little over right around $8.5 million, and an operating deficit in those funds of $876,000. And then in our restricted use funds, we have, again, expenditures exceeding our revenues And in these funds, it's mainly because we're doing our capital projects here. We have our working cash fund and our capital projects where we're paying for many of the renovations that we're doing in the district. And overall, we have a deficit in the all funds of $1.8 million projected at this time. Okay, the next slide shows our revenues by source. And we have total revenues projected for all funds of $25.9 million. And we look at revenues by source for the operating funds. Property tax revenue is the biggest component of revenues for the district. And for operating funds, that's makes up almost 80% of our revenues. And that's roughly about $18.3 million. Then local sources are about 7.29%, and that's $1.7 million. State sources, $1.8 million. Federal sources are $1.1 million. And so you can see that really, the bulk of our funds are coming from property taxes. And we're also seeing that, the state sources are decreasing a little bit over time. And then in terms of all sources, property taxes are about 77% of all of the district's revenues in all funds. Then we have the next slide shows the expenditures by object for the funds. And again, all funds expenditures are $27.7 million. If we look at total salaries, they're projected to be about $14.8 million. And salaries in the operating funds alone comprise 62% of our operating fund expenditures. Benefits are almost another 10%. So overall, we're have 72% of our expenditures in salary and benefits. So as we look to address our budget deficit, obviously that's the component where we're going to have to look at to make our biggest impact in terms of reductions. Our purchase services and supply, expenditures are very minimal. Purchase services are about $2.8 million and supplies about $1.6 million. So again, in terms of where you're going to have an impact in trying to do budget cuts or look at things as we go into the future, the focus really has to be on your salaries and benefits component. Okay, capital outlay is about $340,000. Again, just 1.29% of your operating funds and a little over 2% of your overall budget. You can also see tuition is about $1.8 million, and out of the operating funds, that's 7.5%. And these are expenditures for students in our special ed programs and private placements, in our SACID program, and also in our technology and our voc ed program with TDC and the DEOS program. And then we also have budgeted some transfers in there of interest income from one fund to another, and also our capital projects are budgeted in there. So our revenue assumptions for the preliminary budget, we have our CPI of 0.1% for the 2009 levy, and we've estimated a 1.5% CPI for the 2010 levy. This is a little bit lower than what was in your initial projections, I believe in February that PMA presented. Kevin and I met with PMA about a month ago and reviewed that. There's some trend of the CPI going down, and so to be conservative, we had modeled 2.5%, which has been, roughly a 10-year average for CPI. But in terms of being conservative and based on what the indications of CPI were at that time, decided to lower that rate at this point in time. Another piece that's important is interest rates are at historic lows. While we have locked into a lot of our balances earning 0.75% with our current agreement with our bank, That is going to change over time, and right now CD rates are anywhere from 0.19 to 0.25%. We had investments 2 years ago earning, over 4%. Last year, we had interest income in our working cash fund of about $235,000. Off the top of my head, I think we're predicting about $13,000 of interest income this year in that fund. The main reason for that is that we had a long-term mature at a very high interest rate. We're not going to be able to earn that rate of interest going forward. And as we spend down that balance to do our projects, again, we have less money to invest. So we've made some adjustments in our interest earnings. On the positive side, in terms of revenue necessary for the parents, we did have an increase in student and parking fees. Again, though, we'll bring in minimal additional revenues to the district because we don't know, again, what the offset may be in terms of fee waivers and things like that. Also, when I was doing my analysis, I noticed that our food service revenues have been below what we've budgeted. So I have a decrease in there for food service revenue. We also, there's some talk about we may have a little bit less reimbursement in that area this year as well. And one of the things I will be looking at is doing a revenue and expenditure analysis for food service, so we have a true idea of where we're running and look at that program to see if there's some changes we need to make. If revenues are down just because of the economy and people aren't having their children buy lunch, or if there's something else we can do to enhance the program. Again, estimates for CPPRT, the corporate personal property replacement taxes, are a little bit lower, and again, that's based on information that we have from our financial advisor, and we don't have those final numbers at this point. And then when we look at our state revenues, we held state revenues flat. For many of our grants, we still don't know what our Title I funding is going to be at this point in time. They eliminated the Reading Improvement Block Grant and the ADA Block Grant, so those are two places where we have decreased revenues over last year. And then our federal revenues are also decreasing, and this is really a result of the ERA grants. And that was a 2-year grant, and we spent a majority of our grant monies last year. And so right now we're just spending the remaining balance there. So the remaining balance is less than what we had spent last year. And then in terms of expenditures, salary and benefits, administrative salaries were held flat this year, and that produced a savings of approximately $183,000. And again, part of that was the elimination of the curriculum director position. The WESPA salaries are increasing per contract, and that's at 1.5%. And the WCMA salaries are increasing at 3.9%, again, per contract. As I spoke about earlier, we eliminated the curriculum director position and a tech support position. We eliminated our PBS stipends and summer school. We had reductions of secretarial staff to part-time at Miller and at the junior high school. We reduced a custodian at the junior high school by half, and also are working to eliminate some of our overtime in that area. Although we'll see some increases in salary costs just because of we have to have some additional staff to cover absences. And then we also reduced our coordinator stipends at both the high school and junior high school. And then benefits increase are about 5.6% over the FY9 actuals. Our insurance premiums run from April through March, and so we're projecting about a 9.9% increase, but that doesn't equate to a full 9.9% in the current year. In terms of purchase services, we have increases in the ed fund for legal fees, and this is a result of negotiating 2 contracts this year. We're in the process of negotiating our Teachers Association contract, and we'll also have our, which one was it again?
Maintenance
the maintenance and custodial contract will be due, and we'll try and get both of those actually accomplished in this fiscal year. The other thing, and I forgot to add it on the slide, was the workman's comp premiums, which are part of both the ed and the tort funds. And that increased, our workman's comp cost increased by 40% this year. It went from $71,000 last year to over $100,000 this year. So one of the areas, it's an incredible increase, and it's based on our experience. So another thing that we're going to be focusing on is working with our insurance company about maybe having some trainings, see what types of accidents and things we're having, and do some trainings with staff on those so that we can start incorporating some safety procedures in the district so we can start seeing our experience hopefully go down. Then, again, increases for tuition for our special education and technology center of DuPage. We added 8 new students to our TDC or TCD programs. And again, our tuition costs for our special ed students, some of that is really out of our control. It's based on IEPs and requirements. And then we also have increases for our grant expenditures. And this, what we're seeing in the grants this year is kind of a shift from the supply budget to the purchase services budget in the way the grants were written. In our operation and maintenance fund, we included the cost of the building renovation study that we talked about tonight, so that's in there. And that may be one of those things we might be able to put into the capital projects budget. I still need some time to investigate that, and we'll have that answer before the final budget. We've got increases for utilities for our water and gas at about 3%. And then we should see we have a reduced electricity rate, and I'm hoping we will see some decreases there. But unfortunately, our usage is going to be up, at least for the summer months, because of all the hot weather. So I've kind of left that stable right now. We have increases in the transportation fund per contract at 2.7%. And then I also was contacted by the bus company. We are going to add some additional buses for the first week or so of school. They're not really sure what the ridership is going to look like at the high school. So we're going to look at that and very quickly make a decision if we have to add additional routes or not. I'm hoping we don't. Typically, students at the high school, they sign up for the bus, but they don't really ride it. So we'll have an extra buses the first several days of school to make sure everybody has a way to get to school, but quickly evaluate whether we actually need those in the long term. And then in terms of supplies, again, decreases in the ed and O&M fund, and that's really a result of the grant funding. In the O&M fund, we had some of the playground equipment and some other things in there. And again, in the education fund, some of the grants, we're actually doing more purchase services this year. In terms of capital projects, we have built in the cost of a new truck for snow plowing in the O&M fund, and that's estimated to be about $50,000 with a trade-in of a current vehicle. Again, this is another project that could come out of expenditure that could come out of the capital projects fund. So we'll kind of look at that and gather some feedback about which fund we want to take that purchase out of if everyone thinks that that's what they want to go ahead with. And then we have the auditorium seat replacement, which is almost completed, and the refinishing of the gym floor at the high school, which has been finished. And then our life safety projects, which we're working on this summer, are the window replacements at the junior high and the operable partition. Some key considerations in terms of the development of this preliminary budget. Our revenue projections are conservative, especially in light of state funding and the fact that the state still owes us quite a bit of money from last fiscal year, FY10. Our current expenditures exceed revenues in the operating funds. And one of the things that will be important for the board to determine is really what their goal is with respect to the budget, and if they want to work toward having a balanced budget where our revenues equal expenditures, or how we want to look at things going forward, and how we want to address the current deficit spending. The other thing, we need to be cognizant of the district's cash flow needs, because at some point in time you have to look out, cash flow looks good for the next few years, but if you're going to continue to spend more than your income, you'll have to consider maybe the possibility of issuing tax anticipation warrants to meet cash flow needs. So all those things need to be addressed. The other thing we want to, be aware of when we're looking at our budget and this reporting to the state, they include working cash as part of the operating funds, and so that is part of our financial profile score and looking at our ability to have funds available to make payments. Our working cash is not like, a lot of districts have working cash and they actually levy for it in their tax rate. This district does not levy working cash. That's those bonds for the capital projects. So that's not really money that can be set aside to meet short-term cash flow needs. So that's another thing that I just want to make sure you're aware of. And then finally, the 2010-11 budget is aligned with board and district goals to provide educational services to the students and families we serve. Now I'll address any questions that people have.
I'm sorry. So as far as the money that the state owes us, how is that figured into?
We did not put that in there because we are not sure that, that we'll receive that. Our best hope is that we'll receive that. And the other thing that you have to be aware of is, like, when we're looking at our audit's done a modified accrual. Our audit will already take in and assume we get that money. So, and our budget's really on cash. So we're gonna just project the revenues and expenditures for this current fiscal year.
But even that, the state money that we've projected for this current fiscal year, even if we catch some of last year's
Right,
money, there's a very strong likelihood that we will miss some of this year's money.
Exactly, and that's what happened last year. You received transportation payments in this year that were really in FY10 that were really FY09 monies. So it's always just kind of moving from one year to the next. You wind up flat in each year, but the one year where they didn't pay, which I think was FY09, that year was real low, and it just keeps rolling forward. And hopefully at some point they'll catch up, but I wouldn't count on that.
First, I'd like to say thank you for this. This it helps to understand what all of this is, so thank you for that. But I guess that, some of these negative numbers, I guess we're going to be having some more tough budget discussions.
Yeah, well, I think I said even after the budget cut conversations that we clearly didn't get there, and we are going to continue to bleed. So we are going to continue to have really hard conversations, and there's several that are going on right now. So, and I'll touch on something. Just for purposes of clarification, you mentioned tax anticipation warrants. Basically, it was a preface to, if we continue to spend more money than we take in, we will run out of money. We will run out of money approximately in the month of May, the first time that happens, because that's the month before we get our first tax levies for the calendar year. The point at which that happens, we can't pay bills. So the only way to pay bills is to borrow money. And that's what tax anticipation warrants are. It's a way for school districts to borrow short-term money in anticipation of their tax revenues in June. So, with that as an observation, if we ever actually have to talk about tax anticipation warrants as a board, that means we will be out of money. And this particular board member can't even begin to fathom a conversation where we have to borrow money, because at that point, we are on a downward spiral that can only get catastrophically worse. So at that point, there will be a necessity for catastrophic cuts.
And those are going to be hard discussions
Oh, they're very difficult discussions.
and we have to, continue to talk about, talking to our community about that and how all these other discussions about spending money are different. And that's going to be a tough task for all of us as we spend some and take some things away.
But thank you for the presentation,
Yes,
Kim. That
this
was
is very
fantastic.
good. This is very good.
So at this point, then, this gets posted for 30 days?
Yes.
And then we vote on it in our September 20th meeting, yes? Okay.
Okay. Do you want to continue then, Kim?
Okay, do we have to approve?
No, you have to approve.
Yeah,
Oh,
let's-
are we
let's approve
doing
the,
that? Do you want to do that now? Yeah, that's, okay. I move for the approval of the tentative budget for fiscal year 2010-2011 as presented, and that said budget be available for public inspection in the district's business office from August 18, 2010 until board adoption on Tuesday, September 21st, 2010.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Luback?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
And there will be a hearing on this in September?
Right, there will be a public hearing prior to
Public
the
hearing.
approval
Okay.
of the budget at our September 21st meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and then in terms of the financials for the month of July, the student activity account information is detailed for your review. Fund balance summary is also there, and you can see our fund balance went down about $900,000 this month. We should be receiving taxes early in September, so you'll see some money coming back into the funds. Investments, the investment balance is the same as last month. We have not done any other long-term investments at this point based on rates. And then in terms of an analysis of the month of July, revenues in the ed and tort funds were slightly higher than the prior three-year average. And this really is a result of the fact that we received some of the fourth quarter payments for the state, and I listed those out. We received about $312,000 for different things, especially related to some of our special ed payments. And we also received some ERA Title I money and Medicaid fee-for-service money. And we're still waiting on about $229,000 from the state for the third quarter categoricals, and then about another $64,000 in federal revenues. In the O&M fund, we're basically on par with the 3-month average and proceeding as projected. In the transportation fund, revenues are significantly higher than the prior 3-year average. We've received 15.64% of budgeted revenues, and again, this is because of the late payments from the state for transportation. We received second and fourth quarter special ed payments for the regular and special ed transportation. And then we're still waiting on payments for the third quarter. And hopefully they'll be coming soon. And if you look at the transportation fund compared to last year at this time, we had received some late payments last year as well. So our percentage received was 11.34 last year, 15.64% this year. And that's because that's how those late payments are impacting the 2 years. Prior to that, we had received 5.3% 11%. So that's where that's kind of falling into place. In terms of expenditures, the ed and tort funds are running about 2% above last year, and this is a direct result of paying our SACID tuition a month early. They needed revenues for cash flow purposes and have asked all their districts to make their tuition payment in July instead of August. So that's why that's up, and that should level off going forward. O&M is comparable to last year and the 3-year average. And then the transportation fund is running well below the 3-year average, but comparable to 2 years prior. Last year in FY09, we had received some transportation bills late, so they got paid in the following fiscal year, and that's why that percentage is off. Does anyone have any other questions?
Any questions? Okay. Anything else then?
That's
Just
it.
the expense report now? Are we there?
Oh,
Did
and
you have
then all
anything
the
else?
bills,
I mean, did
yeah,
you-
I don't
okay.
have anything else. All the
Okay.
bills are there for
Okay.
payment, and hopefully anyone who had questions, they were answered.
Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the bills for the month of August 2010 as presented in attachment number F5 in the amount of $1,047,262.55.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Okay, are there any other public comments at this time? Okay. Then the chair will entertain did anyone have anything else? before we go in? The chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing negotiations.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Yes.
And we do not anticipate a vote after tonight's discussion. Thank you.